except for some idiot that's handpicked by Wall Street. Robert Citrone is in a case of a pension manager, if you go back and look it up, who was caught. It's easy to get a guy like that to do your bidding. You show up, you've got your nice suit from Wall Street. He's a schlub in the middle of nowhere. You go to the local strip bar, you buy him a cocktail, and he's going to put $500 million worth of shit into the pension account because he's an idiot, and he's a useful idiot. And that's the pension account. That's the pension business in America. Why are pensions underperforming? Why is there a pension crisis in America? Because Wall Street uses it as a waste dump. That's truth. That's the way it is.
And the idea is that if they implode, then they're effectively backed by
they'll get bailed out
by the Congress, right?
They get bailed out. The S&L crisis, they got bailed out. That was the trick. They said these CDs are guaranteed by the government. Let's use the government as the backstop. Same thing in the 2008 crisis. Same thing with the FTX crisis. They're banking on the feds bailing them out. Is this guy in jail, even though he's patently?
So you're nationalizing the risk and privatizing the upside.
Yeah. Absolutely, but it's gone on for decades. And it gets worse and worse because, especially during an environment of the past 40 years where interest rates got cheaper and cheaper. So the basic fuel for financial fraud is cheap money.
Yes.
And the central bank, which is now, reluctantly raising rates, they should have been raising rates years ago because that's the role of the central bank, price stability. They essentially said, you know what? We actually believe we are better at pricing oil than you guys.
Yeah.
You're pricing oil in Chicago and it's totally manipulated. And, since we're the producer, I think we'll price the oil from here on. And suddenly inflation went out of the roof because they took it out of the hands of the financiers.
Right.
And now the pricing power for commodities in the world are with the producers. That means the BRICS. That means Russia. That means China. That means Brazil, right? So that's where America now is in a real conundrum because how are they going to suddenly get out of this mess that they've created by lax financial oversight for 40 years? The Sam Bankman-Fried, as abhorrent and ridiculous as it is, he's actually just the tip of the iceberg. There is really, I always say that if you took fraud out of the American economy, there would be nothing left. It's an economy run almost entirely on fraud. And fraud is celebrated. Like the movie The Wolf of Wall Street, people don't see that as a cautionary tale and they should avoid committing fraud. It's used as a playbook by this generation. Like, I'm going to steal whatever I can as fast as I can. That's the morals. That's the ethos you find.
So you think the war in Ukraine was a pivot point?
Yeah.
In our economy?
Yes.
So what would explain the religious fervor with which with Wall Street and the Democratic Party and parts of the Republican Party are backing?
This is why El Salvador has become the beacon. So El Salvador is now the shining city on the hill. El Salvador is now where hope lives in the world because you have a president who recognized the potential of Bitcoin early, who recognized that everything else was garbage. And none of these scandals are hitting El Salvador right now. There's no FTX scandal. There's no Mike Novogratz. There's no Charles Hoskinson. There's no Brock Pierce in El Salvador because he pushed them all out. And now they formally created a Bitcoin office. They formally created new securities laws, which will open the way for volcano bonds. So they're going to escape the IMF by producing their own volcano bond financing mechanism, which I'm consulting on.
What's a volcano bond?
So you're tapping into geothermal energy to reward investors with a Bitcoin dividend via a bond offering, essentially is what it is. So it's a volcano-backed bond. And the proceeds are used to enhance their geothermal energy capacity because they have a lot of stranded energy. We already know it works because in Iceland, they developed a huge Bitcoin mining industry tapping into the Icelandic geothermal energy, of which they have a lot. Before, Iceland, the way that they would export that energy is that they invited aluminum smelters to come, like Alcoa, and they smelt aluminum in Iceland using the very cheap geothermal energy. Yes. Then they export that aluminum.
It takes enormous energy to smelt metal.
Right. The numbers are startling. Now, I don't want to get lost in my cards here, but let's take a look at this, Tucker. GDP up 10.3% in El Salvador. Tourism up 52%. That's directly related to Bitcoin. Employment up 7%. Exports up 17%. Internal revenue is up 37%. Not by raising taxes, but by shaming people to pay their taxes. The finance director goes on TV every Thursday and says, "Hey, you there, the grocery store chain owner, you didn't pay your taxes." And they're like, "Oh, you got me." It's really hilarious.
They really do that?
Yeah, it's like a game show, But if you didn't pay your taxes, you lose the game show.
No, really?
Yeah. Minister Zelaya, this guy is the top finance minister in the world. I love this guy. And he goes on TV every week and shames people, the big titans of industry who didn't pay their tax. And they rate their tax collections are up 37%, right? Violent crime.
Wait, without using guns or prison sentences,
No.
just by shaming people
That's
on TV.
right. And not raising taxes. I mean, imagine if you got people in America to pay their taxes. I mean, here's an argument that people say, well, you know, the rich in America pay most of the taxes. And, you know, that's true, but on reported taxes. Because once you get to a certain income plateau, you don't report. And banks advertise that service. They're like, okay, you know, well, we won't go down that rabbit hole right here. But here's another
But people are not really paying their taxes here, is bottom line.
Exactly. There's like $22 trillion in a floating pool of money to deal with this extraordinary problem of the Chicago gang violence. That special force was called the Federal Bureau of Investigation. And you also had a guy named Elliot Ness. Remember him? The Untouchables.
Of course.
And because it was so corrupt that they couldn't find a single person who wasn't corrupt. And it became a legend. The guy who couldn't be corrupted. So President Bukele is Elliot Ness. President Bukele is the guy who said, enough is enough. We are drawing the line in the sand, no more. And violent crime is down 95%. The numbers are there. And as a result, the criminals in El Salvador were extorting from the population of 7 million people at a GDP of 28 billion. They were extorting $6 billion a year in a $28 billion economy. So by getting rid of
just hemorrhaging money,
$6 billion a year, 20% of GDP. So then by getting rid of the crime, right, you feel like a 20% tax cut or 20% tax abatement, or it's a gift.
Yeah.
So like the local pupusa seller, you know, they sell pupusas, which are the local cuisine. I don't know if you've tasted one in El Salvador, but there's 5,000 pupusa sellers in the country, mostly women. And I went to my local pupusa seller and she said, I said, I didn't order extra cheese. She said, no, this is the way it is now because I have extra money and I just hired somebody to work with me. So the big banks on Wall Street who are looking for a bailout this time, they're going to be surprised. They're going to be left to rot. They're not going to be bailed out this time. The Fed's going to say, you're out. We're going to go directly to consumer. Here's a CBDC. Now, the problem is, of course, that it's programmable money and centralized money. It's no different than fiat money. And the tricks that you can do with it are insanely dystopian. For example, and we already know this is happening in China. They already have a version of this, social credit scores, et cetera. But, you know, for example, you know, you'll get your CBDC and it'll say it's good for until 2024, February of 2024. And then this money that you just earned, it expires. It expires.
Why would they do that?
Because they want you to spend it as quickly as possible and they don't want you to save your money. If you save money and you're a sovereign individual, you're dangerous to them. So they don't want anyone saving money. They want people to spend money and they want people to spend money as fast as they can. So this CBDC, programmable money from the central bank, will have an expiration date, like a frequent flyer mile. Number two, it'll be tied through vast databases to your behavior. So if you're antisocial, according to them, then you will lose privileges. You know, passport could get canceled, or you are suddenly, you can't book a flight, or you're any number of ways to manage you socially.